Lynn is at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and is threatening to retire. But Lynn, we're not going to let you do that. Lynn has authored numerous really influential papers. I remember Lynn in and out of the dark. That was, I think, my first exposure to your wonderful writing. We're also joined by Penny Maria Jackson, who is a wonderful arts professional currently based in Chicago and head of marketing for Steppenwolf Theater Company, and doing a lot of experimenting with marketing relationships, right? So welcome, Penny Maria. And Ann Torrigiani, who is the founder and CEO and overall guru of Audiences Everything, audience research, audience behaviors, marketing. Ann is really one of the leading thinkers about audiences in the world, and we're so thrilled to have Ann joining us from London, I assume. Ann, welcome. So what a great group of people. I appreciate all three of you. Just to set up this whole conversation, I want to give you all a little background. Thanks all for introducing yourselves in the chat. I just want to notice, hopefully we are recording this session, and we will share a recording of that with everyone. But okay, why are we looking at marketing relationships? And actually, after we titled this webinar, Interrogating Marketing Relationships, I thought actually we shouldn't necessarily frame it as marketing relationships, because that already puts relationships in a box that I'm not sure we want or need. So coming out of the pandemic, I mean, as all of you know who are on the front lines of marketing, the trend in subscription was going down. And then the pandemic hit and our subscriber base basically was wiped out and we had to rebuild. Many organizations are successfully rebuilding their subscription bases. Many are struggling now to do that. We get a lot of questions here at Wolf Brown about, can we have confidence that we will get back to where we were with subscription, or even reverse the trend and grow subscription in the future? And I've noticed some organizations really doubling down on subscription, San Francisco Opera being one of them. And I also see quite a few organizations experimenting with other kinds of relationships, particularly memberships and different kinds of memberships and under 35 programs. I went to the Orchestra League webinar that talked about the Classic Card app in Berlin, which I thought is really interesting approach to kind of social making attendance social, and kind of automating that. So it's my general sense is that we are at a moment where we've collectively realized that we need to relook at what relationships we offer our publics. And actually that's been going on for a long time. I mean, Anne, maybe you're aware that there's been people have been experimenting with memberships and other kinds of programs for a long time. But I don't necessarily think that it's been a focus of serious scholarly research that would lead us to understand more about the underlying drivers of affiliation, or what behaviors are we rewarding or incentivizing or disincentivizing with the relationships we offer. What are the sociological aspects of this? How do we respond to changing conditions in the consumer marketing environment? and kind of all of that. So that's why we kind of started this. And I just want to recognize that certainly we're not the only ones talking about marketing relationships. I know, Penny Maria, you were a participant in a webinar produced by Capacity Interactive just recently. I think focusing on membership models, I think, which is fantastic. So I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people working towards this, hopefully. I mean, this is a full court press. We're really talking about shifting tectonics of how we relate to the public here. So in my opinion, it needs to be all hands on deck. Is subscription a vessel for capturing affinity or passion? If 90% of the relationship we've been inviting people into is one of subscribing, what behaviors are we rewarding? And I want to just show you one graph, and hopefully that will be the right, yes, there we go. I promise to only show you one graph. This was part of the very end of our COVID study, and we were actually exploring this notion of passion and all the ways people might get more involved in this case, classical music. So we asked people, following's a list of activities you might do in the future to fulfill your personal interest in classical music. Select those you're especially interested in doing. And lo and behold, Hail Mary, 2/3 of people said, I want to attend more live concerts by the organization that sent me this survey. Yay. Maybe that's latent demand. And then the same number of people said, I want to attend a wider range of concerts beyond the organization that sent me the survey. And kind of so there's certainly appetite at an abstract level for more live attendance, which is really good. But then we started asking about all the other things that you might do. So for example, learning about composers you admire and new composers, 39%. So I just want to show you that we're we're cross-tabbing the results here by subscriber status. So the column on the left are current subscribers, the middle lapsed subscribers, and on the right, never subscribe. So individual ticket buyers. And so the first thing you just see of all these activities, first of all, 25 to 30% of folks said they want to take a course on a specific style or period of music. Now, I'm not representing that a quarter of all audience members for classical music are going to run out and sign up for a course. But in the abstract, there was some interest in that. Watching more recordings of concerts you've already seen, watching more programs through video streaming services, supporting young artists who lack access to music instruction. And overall, what you see here is just a lot of interest in a lot of activities that would deepen one's appreciation for the art form. And I thought we'd see a big spike that subscribers are really the most interested in doing all of this, but that is not the case. They're equal level of passion and interest in the art amongst former subscribers and especially never subscribe. I thought it would be much less. So I just wanted to share that with you. If we theorize that subscription is the container for passion, we are dead wrong. It is not. We'll get into this. It is a container for people who can make multiple advanced commitments, right? So I think we want to look at what are the elements of a successful relationship, like what is trust, reciprocity, like what are we what define right now success, I think, is defined in terms of frequency of transactions? And is that the horse we want to ride into the future? So I just also want to point out the sort of bilateral nature of institutional marketing. Like, we have institutions who are communicating with an individual saying, please come, here's your offers. And in some cases, that individual represents a household of one, sometimes a household of two, but often the actual attendance configuration requires that person to go outside of their household and put together a social occasion. And we're marketing on a bilateral basis with an individual, but on their side, it's actually a multilateral exchange. There's other people involved. Fundamentally, they can't go out without a multilateral exchange. And is that reflected in some way in our relationships? So we're just hoping to poke at this idea of marketing relationships. I'll be transparent in saying I'm hoping that some point in 2024, we can put together some sort of a study, maybe a couple of studies that get at this notion of affinity, relationships, the sociology of attendance, user outcomes, and just how consumers relate to the portfolio of opportunities in their community. Because people don't experience us one institution to one institute. They experience us on a conveyor belt of opportunities. And to my knowledge, there's not a lot known about that. So it's going to be very theoretical. Bear with us. We're going to have fun, I'm sure. I just want to start with a quick poll. There's a little menu on the right-hand side of your screen with a chart. There's a little graph icon. And Anik, if you could make that poll live. And I'm going to ask you the question: if you were going to design a new kind of relationship, not subscription, for your organization, which one of the following behaviors would you optimize or design for? All right, long-term loyalty frequency tied to attendance, a growing lifelong interest in the art. Would you optimize for that? Would you optimize for stimulating trial of new or unfamiliar work? Would you optimize for bringing friends? Heaven forbid we would actually reward people for bringing friends to the theater, Penny Maria. And would you optimize for late buying? Good Lord, if people want to buy later and later now, should we be rewarding late buying? Heaven forbid. Or stimulating attendance, really optimizing for accessibility. So go ahead, everyone here, and kind of choose one of those. And I think we'll come back to this at the end, but it's very interesting. I'm seeing a lot of interest in long-term loyalty tied to frequent ticket buying, but also growing lifelong interest. That's really interesting. That we would optimize for lifelong interest, I think is pretty provocative and a paradigm shift in many ways, and some interest in bringing friends. Yeah, fantastic. So all of these results we'll put in the recording of this, but appreciate you all participating in the poll. So let's dive into our discussion, and just jump out to the big context. What we're coming out of a pandemic. Talk about a macro trend, but the macro trends that we're dealing with here certainly predated the pandemic, right? So what are some of the macro trends that are affecting the way consumers interact with arts organizations? Anne, can I throw the first answer out to you?
Well, you're very welcome to, Alan. I'm going to fess up here and say that I think what is really interesting for us in the UK is that we are on a different plane. But I don't want to say, in order not to sound irrelevant to this conversation, I'm going to say, think of us as your control group, right? What happens if a long time ago subscription keeled over and it never quite really matured as a concept and way of doing things, right? But actually, so therefore, I mean, all of those suggestions you've got there, in a way, people have been more or less experimenting with lots of those things for quite a while. I would say that we have two sets of issues that are really different, and I think these are interesting if you think about them being a control for the US cross-Atlantic situation. I think one of them is that we have a very different context for arts and cultural attendance and engagement. For the start, we have a heavily funded system, so we don't that reliance on ticket income isn't as great. So that has in some senses created a certain that creates a, let's not say that it makes us a bit lazy, let's say that it just creates a different environment, and sometimes we're thinking about different kinds of goals. But I think we also have a situation in which, in the psyche of our audiences, arts attendance and loyalty and supporting your local venue or organisation doesn't sit in quite the same place. So there's something really socially different as well. So we have a policy funding difference, we have a kind of social aspirations difference. But I think, and all of that has kind of compounded a kind of an inertia around relationship building, actually. So although you'll see in all of our textbooks, in all of the theories, we talk about audience development, we talk about great cultural marketing, and we talk about relationship building, we summarily fail to do it. So although it's there in our theoretical way of thinking about doing it, as a whole industry in this country, we tend to think much more on a kind of show-by-show basis, and we kind of try to build relationships through programming connections, but not necessarily through subscription in the traditional way. So I don't think this makes it irrelevant. I think we are an interesting control.
Yeah.
So we've seen a kind of real dropping off of not just of the sort of loyalty type packages, but generally to do with, I think the big macro trend has been to overcommitting to early commitment has become less and less popular. And if we saw that accelerating anyway in the last 10 years, suddenly COVID has, hugely rushed that, as it would be for all of you. Wow. I think the big point really is that, theatres have spent many years being unable to refund for cancel tickets and so on. And suddenly, for the first time in 200 years, they found a way of doing it. I mean, this is a scary thing to have done, because now everybody is expecting that level of flexibility and understanding of their situation. I think that's out the bag, and I think we're going to find it very hard to go back.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for being our control group. Back to the treatment group, Penny Maria. No, that's really helpful, and maybe it makes it a little less scary for us, and because you've sort of decoupled loyalty and are apparently surviving. Penny Maria, what are the macro trends that we're solving for here?
For Steppenwolf, it seems to be specifically a lot of barriers, and we're finding that those barriers are also true for a lot of our colleagues. And so we're all trying to collectively figure out how to get past these challenges that our core audience, our longtime subscribers, are now facing. And marketing, I love a little alliteration. I have a few C's, right? So convenience, right? People want to see theater that is in closer proximity to them. They don't have to worry about driving as long. And let me just preface all of this by saying that Steppenwolf is currently in a research project in the second phase. We've already launched the qualitative phase, and now we're in the quantitative portion. And these are responses that we're seeing across the board. Folks have just gotten so used to the next C, comfort, right? They love being at home in a space that's very familiar to them. In addition to that, familiar stories. So plays that are a part of our canon that promote good, joyous feelings, people are going to see those maybe more so than something that's edgy and different. I think that's why the music industry is doing so much better than the theater world is, right? You listen to music all the time, you play it, you get to see those artists. That's a sense of familiarity.
Mm.
The next C is content. They want and desire and need to be able to connect with the material in deeper ways. That goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Alan, right? They want to know fully what this story is about. What are the characters going through? How did the artist come up with this? They want a chance to have pre and post show conversations and be up close and personal to the artist. And that ties in directly to the last C that it can be a barrier as well, which is community. So trying to build and rebuild rather those connections also means more events. And given the COVID concerns, given the financial challenges, we don't necessarily have the budget to meet all of those needs. And so those have all become a lot of barriers for not only our subscribers, but also new to ticket buyers when you're trying to start these new relationships, start to cultivate these people and get them to come to your venue more than once. So those are a lot of the macro trends we've been seeing here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Penny Maria, so much. Lynn, from a scholarly perspective, what do you see as some of the macro trends?
Well, I can't say that I have a scholarly perspective on macro trends because I'm not a marketer and I don't attending to these things. I find it fascinating with Maria. I think many of the things that you're talking about now are consistent through the literature, is really throughout the history of culture.
Yeah.
And particularly late 20th and early 21st century. The thing that sticks out to me is the long-standing desire for connection.
Sorry.
Are you doing okay with the sound, Alan?
Lynn, could you turn down your own computer audio? Just to answer.
Yeah, Lynn has had audio, so Lynn is actually coming to you through my cell phone, which I'm holding up to my computer. So please be patient.
So how is that?
Better.
Is this any better? Okay, all right, yeah. You know, it's an interesting thing because after, 3 years now of this kind of interactive modality, you get to understand when people give you that look like, oh man, this is not good. I cannot hear her, but I don't want to interrupt her. Anyway, I think that the critical thing that I see as a scholar, as a historian of audiences, and as a theorist about engagement in the realm of audiencing is this notion of connection. And, you know, when I use the term engagement, I'm really talking about significant cognitive and emotional connection with an arts experience. And that could be the art event itself, like just taking it in and being there in the audience. But it should be a much bigger, much more 360 experience. And probably the pandemic gave people a taste of these different access points. And you know, you talk about the and about the cat being out of the bag in terms of, you know, we revealed as an industry that we could actually give you your money back. And so, hey, and you know, we can all connect to that because I feel that way about getting on an airplane. You can give me my money back. I know you can, but you did it during the pandemic. So, you know, I think those things are obviously part of a larger conversation about the fact that an audiencing means interacting with an organization and having a sense of being a person, of having your personhood acknowledged and appreciated. And I think that's a, you know, that is the big conversation. I have written a lot about comparing audiencing for the serious arts, the so-called serious arts, with audiencing for things like sports, popular music, television, gaming, and the difference in the kinds of engagement that we see for that second kind of audiencing, the deep, really intense engagement that really borders on what we used to call fandom, but now these terms are kind of intermixed. Well, what's that about? It's about the sense that what you think and how you feel about the event itself matters, and that you get to interpret that experience, its meaning and its value in a social or public way, that you have that opportunity to do it. And that's really been the thrust of my scholarship and my writing. And I think we're in that place now even more.
Yeah, even more. So Lynn, just while I have you, sort of, why are we so stuck on subscription?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, again, I feel like this is where I'm not going to have anywhere near as much interesting to say as Anne and Penny Maria, because I've never worked in that part of the arts industry before.
So Penny Maria, you live in your fortunes rise and fall with subscription. Why are we so stuck on subscription? I mean, let's just call it out.
I think that we look to history, and we are so used to planning what has worked. Is kind of ingrained in us, even though it no longer works. We keep thinking maybe it's going to work again, maybe it's going to work again. I think also that when you have a smaller budget to work with and you think about the cost of acquisition, I mean, that is why subscriptions have been so beneficial to arts institutions. Right. But overall, we really know and understand that the patron pipeline, as I call it, is broken specifically in America, in this country. Arts are no longer as prevalent in the school system as they used to be. And so I think as we scramble to figure out how we're going to get the next generation in, we're digging our claws into the folks who are already used to subscriptions and trying to, make that relationship last as long as we can.
Great. And Anne, you've moved past subscription in the UK, or maybe you were never there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure that we ever were quite there. I remember Danny, what's his name?
Danny Newman.
Yes, Danny Newman coming to the UK many years ago now and selling us the idea of subscription. And for a little while, everyone got very committed to it and very excited about it. And it worked in certain art forms in certain places quite well for a while. But actually, I think we lacked the belief and commitment to really try hard at it. Actually, interestingly, which I think that idea that there's a kind of it's the practice norm that we've developed in this country is really different from the way it is in the US. And I do think that is both sort of that there are opportunities cross-Atlantic about that. But one of the things I was going to say that I think is really interesting, picking up on your earlier point, is around how does loyalty, how can we really make the most of loyalty? How do we reward loyalty? How do we build loyalty? And I'm not sure that subscription is necessarily the only way of doing it. I think there may be certain conventions that drive us towards that. So one of the things that we are quite used to looking at data sets where we're looking at people's behaviors and habits across a lot of different venues. So one of the things we can see, so we know quite a lot about the psychographics, we know quite a lot about behavioral things, and we can then see people popping up in different venues. So the more arts interested, the more passion you have, crudely speaking, the more likely you are, if you're in a big city at least, to dip around and go to a lot of places. So in fact, promiscuity is actually a sign of passion. For us, that's so particular. Some of the geography is different as well, right? But certainly, if you're in London, a group that we call metroculturals, they're the super engagers. They're informed. They would say, "What's the most important thing in your life?" They'll talk about the arts and culture being a fundamentally important thing. One of the ways you can spot a metrocultural is that they go everywhere and do everything. Right. So they're super loyal to many organizations. Right. It would definitely not, they know what they like. They don't need you to curate anything for them. Thank you very much. They know their own tastes. they will go and find their own way. So in fact, your point about the bilateral relationships, I think is really germane here, because I do think we, in a 21st century world in which we can now use data to curate more interesting relationships in a more collaborative way, I do think the idea of multilateral relationships, which is what I think you were pointing us potentially towards there, Alan, is a really interesting one. So maybe many of us to one of you, the public, might be a better way of really thinking. I think subscription is all about selfishness. It was all about us. If we're thinking all about you, our audiences, I think we might act very, very differently.
That's great. So this is a really geeky research question for you, but where do we need to reach outside of our own intellectual walls to find insights that we need to design and be successful with more and different relationships? Like the study of affinity. Lynn, you said you look at sports teams and other kinds, like people who have strong bonds with a church organization. I mean, there's supposedly a theological affinity there also. But by the way, you're able to go into the the Q&A section here, and if you want to comment on these questions, please do while we're talking. Behavioral psychology, sociology, in the management sciences, you have decision choice theory. I mean, like, where do we need to go? Where do we need to reach? And Lynn, I want to give you a chance since you're a scholar.
I'd love to talk about that, and I'm gonna plug this book in the hopes that it will be meaningful to the audience. So this is the Routledge Companion to Audiences in the Performing Arts. It was published a little less than a year ago. There are 4 editors and about 60 authors, and I think it's a very important opportunity for the field to really explore the wide variety of disciplines that are interacting with this notion of audiencing and about the experience, the cultural experience of looking at performing arts in particular here. But I think a lot of this research is very applicable to the museum industry for sure. The approaches in the book include everything from cultural history and performance studies and anthropology and sociology to evolutionary biology, reception theory, philosophy, critical race theory, neuroscience, disability studies, arts management, arts marketing.
Yeah.
It's a wide range of discussions and a lot of really interesting ways to think about not only how we collect information about audiences. There's a lot of analysis of that, and a lot of self-critical analysis of it. Like, why do we do these things? Do they really work? Are they good practices? Are these best practices? Are they fair practices? Do these practices meet our equity and inclusion goals? There's a tremendous amount of conversation about that, and really looking at ourselves as researchers. And then there's also the acknowledgement that the experience of an audience member, of an individual person, of that personhood, is not something that can be effectively reduced to the kinds of tools used in quantitative data collection. It's not to say that data collection is not valuable. It is. It's acknowledged as valuable, but it is critiqued, and we're looking under the hood there and asking some questions about how that process works and how comprehensive numbers data can really be in terms of trying to understand an individual's need for art and for meaning. Right?
Well, I noticed that a lot of people were prioritizing loyalty. And of course, as marketers, that's what I think we are supposed to do is to optimize for loyalty, which then turns into frequency and donation. And we have this whole business of the funnel, you know, the marketing funnel, which is so hierarchical, it's not even funny. And, you know, but the loyalty, what is loyalty to what? Loyalty, we're trying to get people to be loyal to an institution that is presenting art, when in fact, when you go to a popular music concert, your loyalty is to the artist, not to Live Nation or whoever is, you know, like there's really no model for institutional loyalty there. But we're trying to get people to be loyal to institutions, when, at least in music, loyalty really tends maybe more to drift towards artists and less to presenters, although it varies. So, I mean, that just adds layers of complexity to the idea of loyalty. And what I was going to say, Anne, you talked about these metro super users.
Metroculturals.
Metroculturals, yeah, and some other groups as well. I mean, so this is a really a mix of sort of counting and talking to come to those kind of conclusions. That's right. I mean, obviously you get people who are super loyal to particular places, and what they love about it is to do with the experience, the familiarity. You get, you know, other people are you know, loyal to particular artists. Some people are loyal to both for different reasons, right? So there's all of that going on. I think that's right. But I think when we think about, you know, actually, for me, to some extent, it is about, you know, building a great relationship is about reciprocity, isn't it? It's about really understanding what it is that people need from us, not just asking them to always be giving us what we need. And I think that in a digitally enabled world, right, and people's expectations about what giving back, you know, what personalization looks like. I mean, I know it's a sort of a 90s word now a little bit, but actually, nevertheless, the idea that we can serve different people differently, that you don't have to fit into the concert subscription, which has the bit in the middle that you don't like very much just because that's all on offer. I mean, we just live in a world where that doesn't happen anywhere else. And I think the idea of tailoring and building your own relationship, having all the options to have all the different colors and all the different sizes if you want, the mix and match, I think, is with us. And if we don't do it, people will go elsewhere. You know, I think that's the reality of it. And I think that, you know, there is something, that's not to say there's not something magic and special about the kind of the experiences that people are having. It's just they want it on their own terms. They're really busy, you know, so. Right.
So about 10 years ago, 14 years ago, actually, Penny Maria, I did a big customer segmentation study for Steppenwolf Theater, which found, among other things, that some ticket buyers are loyal to the company, and some are actually loyal to the theater as a form, as a lifelong passion. And they're less interested in having a relationship with the company because they're looking at the whole environment of all the theater offerings in Chicago, which is overwhelming on any given weekend. And they're picking and choosing what they want to see based on their very specific knowledge and understanding. And we keep saying, no, would you get married to me?
Yeah.
And they're kind of saying, I'm a chronic, you know, dater, and I don't want to get married to anyone because my commitment is to the form, not to an institution. And I'm just wondering, like, what, you know, could we ever accept that and optimize for loyalty to the form?
Yeah. So I think that is what we need to do. We know and we recognize that, but I think, you know, there are some challenges to us processing that. But for example, in Chicago right now, the theater industry is collectively working on a project called Go Live Chicago. And this is right now a website where we're encouraging just folks to get back into the arts, get back into going out and experiencing these shows, as opposed to just each institution fighting on their own, because we know that is not working in the very best way. So this is something that we are definitely working toward here in the city collectively. And so I think you're right, though, that art form loyalty is where it's at. That's where we have those lifelong members at. And you're right, people are going to go to what they want to go to. And we're seeing that in terms of members purchasing their memberships, but not attending every show, right? So there are no shows, but they feel like they've contributed to the theater, but they're still going to see another show, another place, just because folks are going out less frequently than they used to. So I think that's how we're coming to terms with that, is by collaborating with our fellow arts institutions right now.
And Penny Maria, this would be a good time to just, you briefly mention your black card, your red card, your flex pass, and we can put links in the chat for people to read more about those. But I'm curious, sort of, what's the underlying strategy of offering those are sort of bundles, and what are they incentivizing?
So these are what we call flex memberships. And you get 6 credits that you can use throughout the year, anytime, your way. You can use all 6 tickets for one performance, or you can split them up in, 2 tickets to 3 shows, whatever is convenient for the patron. And for us, this is how we meet patrons where they are. When we get back to that topic of customization and personalization, people really appreciate that. We this came out of the Wallace Foundation grant around 2014. At that time, John Zinn was here managing the project, and it's really, we kind of made it a more of a cool factor, so to speak. So you can even see with the artwork that we chose, the photos, it's kind of creating a sense of ownership and agency, specifically with the relaunch that we just did for these flexible memberships. And we came up with the phrase, my Steppenwolf, my Chicago, my way. We want to create that sense of agency so that we can go back to one of those earlier points from the poll. People aren't just attending, but they're bringing folks, right? Because this is their theater, this is their home. And because of that, they can come and go as they please. They can call the day of.
Target audiences.
Yeah, so for the red card, it's folks who are under 30. And then for the black card, really you can be any age, but we tend to target millennial audiences with that. Folks who are interested in theater, but not yet ready to commit to a classic membership the way that a lot of our older patrons are.
So really, it looks to me like it's an accessibility, you're really creating a marketing point of entry.
Exactly. And I will say that something else that was very reassuring to hear during some of the research that we've been doing is that, it's the marketing dream, right? So we do have, speaking of accessibility, $20 tickets that are available, a very limited amount. But we had one patron who was like, yes, I started with those $20 tickets. Then I became a red card member, a black card member, and now I'm a classic member. So that cultivation does work sometimes. But again, if you meet people where they are earlier on in that relationship, then you can get to that point. And we're very glad and thankful that we've had success there.
I mean, this is a 10-year experiment, right?
Yes, completely.
What fascinated me about the red card and the black card is that they were actually metaphorically like a transit card that you fill up and you deplete and you refill.
Exactly.
And I think that, on a very high level resonates with some people because they know how that works.
Exactly. They understand that. And again, they have the power to choose what they want to see.
Right.
And people love that. Yeah. And then we also created some events around that initially. And post-pandemic, we're looking forward to getting back to that sense of community, creating those opportunities for folks to really gather around performances.
I think that's great. And congratulations on all that good work. And what I'm learning is you're being very clear and very intentional about what you're optimizing for.
Exactly. And we continue to readjust because it's a changing landscape.
Right. Lynn, I want to transition and talk about some audience engagement and educational and that chart I showed earlier about sort of lots of people who are curious about doing lots more. whether they're lying or not, I'm sure they are to some extent, but the raw interest is there. And I'm reminded of some studies from a long time ago, which showed that in a given city, there's, at least for orchestras, there's 4 or 5 as many people who love the art as who actually go to the institution. So the problem is actually not the prospect base. The prospect base is there in terms of people who already love the art. And the more research I do, I hear people saying, I can't wait to retire so that I could spend more time in the arts and going and learning. And I just wonder, could you ever see a time, Lynn, where we start offering educational relationships, learning relationships that are not predicated on buying tickets, but are actually predicated on diving deeper and learning about like opera people, like learn more about Wagner, the Wagner people are crazy, right? And I don't, because it just strikes me, there's all these people out there who want to learn more about the art, and we just keep asking them to buy tickets instead of maybe inviting them into a learning relationship.
Well, yes, I do think there is, there is that capacity and there is that desire. And there are experiments with this. Wallace did a big sort of engagement project in the 2000s, and I did one with the Heinz Endowment
Right.
in Pittsburgh. It was called the Arts Experience Initiative. And what we did was the Heinz gave a big chunk of money to participating organizations, and they had to commit to a plan, an engagement plan that was significant in terms of the opportunity that it offered audience members. And in some cases, it was self-selected small group of audience members, and in some cases, it was the larger fee audience for the organization. And those experiences ranged from the Pittsburgh Chamber of Music Society putting together a group of people who had dinner together and talked about the concerts, and not just, before the concert or briefly afterwards, but a separate going out to a restaurant and devoting that evening to discussion of the concert that had happened. These were lay audience members. They are not musicians. They loved the music that was happening, and they wanted the chance to talk about it, and they wanted to feel as if their opinions about it and their thinking was valid, and that they could think through their reaction. That idea, I call it arts talk, and I've written about that quite a lot and wrote a book about in 2013. That idea that the way in which people engage with the arts is not a full experience until they've been able to interpret what they've experienced, what they've seen. And that for most people, that's most pleasurable when it comes through talking. Not for everybody. But for most people, that idea that you could talk about it and you could share your thoughts and you could gather other people's thoughts and you could debate and discuss. I mean, what does that sound like? It sounds like the sporting culture, right? It sounds like what sports does culturally.
Right.
And sports don't have trouble selling tickets. I'm just going to say.
So would you imagine a time when maybe an opera company, their first approach to someone would be, would you like to join a group that learns about the work of George Friedrich Handel or Richard Wagner, or, and actually that's the entry point.
I can imagine that, and I think there are examples of that. There are examples of that all over the place, certainly in the UK and in the United States, where those kinds of approaches have been initiated, and in places where they're ongoing right now. Yes, I absolutely can imagine that.
And
a natural response to that is going to be, wait a minute, we are an arts organization producing theater. We are not a college, or we are not, it's adding kind of commitment and operational burden that may well not be sustainable. So what I have argued is, where are the partnerships? Where are the partnerships
Right.
in the community?
And would people pay for a learning relationship with a?
Well, I was just getting terribly excited there because I could feel a collaboration coming on, because I think there's a really, really interesting question here. I think, Lynn, I think that's so true about we need to collaborate more to provide that kind of depth and breadth of experience, I think. So, but what I was going to say is that I think we've got a little bit of research that suggests that learning experiences might come in different shapes and sizes, and people might want to pick a mix there as well, in as much as we know that some people, in fact, it tends to be, again, this difference between super engagers having very high levels of cultural confidence and belief in their own knowledge and information. So, for example, quite formalized learning opportunities being a bit more popular with less confident audiences. I mean, I'm generalizing massively,
Right.
But then also people who are like real sense, sort of who just take their descriptions off the wall. I don't want to know what the artist's intention was. I want to make up my own mind, But that kind of more, I want a sensory experience. I don't want an intellectual experience. So there's let's call them something like intellectuals, sensors. And I then think there are kind of people who are super participants who want to get their hands dirty. I love this little story that's happened recently, where Opera North, the opera company, used to do sort of in-person opera singing lessons, but they could only do it for a very small number of people. So they had 20 people do it. And then suddenly they just decided to put this experience online through the pandemic, and they had 500 people turn. I mean, it was just, I think I'm embellishing the story now, but I love it so much. They suddenly discovered all these people who wanted to learn how to be an opera singer. They were participants, they didn't want to learn about it. They wanted to learn how to do it, and that's a bit different. So I'm loving an idea that you might have an opportunity to get deeper in, but on your own terms, and that there may be a sort of a segmentation idea about what kind of depth you want to reach. There might be different ones.
Yeah, I think they might have tripped the karaoke wire, but
they may well have done. Yeah.
I mean, I'm also reminded of arts groups, especially larger groups that have very large social media constituencies, and they just keep marketing. Social media just becomes a marketing channel instead of an engagement channel. And our educational relationships, little courses, little thing, a way to engage that larger constituency, maybe. Well, we're almost at time. I just want to throw it back once more to all of our panelists. If we were about to take a serious scholarly look at customer relationships, what kinds of questions should we be answering? What opportunities perhaps should we be looking at? And I'll just start with Penny Maria.
This is such a great question, Alan. I still was kind of thinking about this and what might be the best answer, which I don't think I've quite come to yet. But one thing that really seems important to me is to really get an understanding of how people are moving through our space, experiencing not only the shows, but their engagement with folks as soon as they walk in the door, with our staff, with other folks who are there to see the show, to kind of get an understanding of that human element that makes theater so special across the board. Like, honestly, if we could, I would even like to hook people up so that you could see or monitor their like heart levels throughout the production, or like, as folks are touching elbows next to each other in the seats, right? So that we could really get an understanding of how important, these experiences are, and be able to communicate that to them, make that part of our pitch or our campaign, so to speak.
Fantastic. Lynn, what problem are we solving here? Where under what rocks should we look?
Well, I just want to say, Penny Maria, in this Routledge Companion, there's a whole chapter on hooking people up to monitors, sensory, and so from the neuroscience perspective, and they did a study. It's fascinating. So I highly recommend it. Well, I think for me, the question will always continue to be what do our audiences want to do with the experience that they've had?
Mhm.
What do they want to do with it? And that might be, leave me alone. I just want to feel and think by myself. But it probably for most people is something more.
Yeah,
And can we help you? Can we be a
fantastic.
part
Yeah.
of it?
So you're really suggesting a paradigm shift away from serving the institution's needs to really looking at what real people's lives are like and how they construct cultural outings and what they want from it. That's great. Anne, bring us home. What problem are we solving?
No, I'm loving all of that. I think that's spot on. The idea that it is about it's all about you, not about us really. And I think that the idea that, well, I would like to say that actually trying to go on that journey and create deeper, broader, more experimental experiences for people is hard work on your own. So I do think there is a collaborative level that we might, we can experiment on behalf of each other. For example, I have to say I'm loving Penny Maria's example. The red card, black card is all about reversing the subscription model. You're offering flexibility for your loyalty, not being locked in. That's already a great leap forward. But that idea that we continue to share the things that we learn, we share our research, we share what we know. That's the first level of collaboration. But I think there is more that we can do together. To we do need to open up and think much more broadly about what kinds of experiences.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you all so much. We're at time. I'm afraid we need to draw this to a close. Clearly, there's so much here to interrogate, and we're just going to work hard to hold open our minds to understanding this research problem and where we might find insights. We've touched on potentially multilateral social relationships, educational relationships. We didn't even talk about late buying relationships, like how would we actually welcome people who can't make up their minds until the last minute and all that good stuff. So we hope to bring forward a series of webinars later this year on maybe some of those individual kinds of relationships. But thank you, Lynn and Penny Maria. You're so generous to share your experience and wisdom. And thanks all of you for listening in. We'll post a recording to the site soon. So on behalf of all of us at Wolf Brown, thanks so much.